This is Scott Fain with the Youngstown Lifestyle Podcast, where I take some time to learn more about the people and opportunities within the Youngstown, Ohio community. Today my guest is Matthew Heikkinen. He's an investor, a financial rep with AmeriFirst Home Mortgage, and a licensed realtor with Century 21 Lakeside in Youngstown. Matt is a fascinating guy with many years of great experience both inside and outside the local real estate market. He took the time today to share some of his wisdom about investing in the Youngstown area that any new or seasoned investor can learn from. So without further delay, let's start the show. This is the Youngstown Lifestyle Podcast, and my name is Scott Fain, and my guest today is Matthew Heikkinen. That's Heikkinen, for those of you who don't know how to pronounce the name. I had a little trouble myself. Matt, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. What many people do not, or maybe aren't aware of, if they haven't heard of you, you are a real estate person. You do financing from AmeriFirst Home Finance and Century 21 Lakeside. So you have a grasp of the real estate market, especially in the Youngstown area. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's more than fair. I have a diverse background in real estate. Both here, I grew up in the Valley. Started practicing real estate here in the Valley almost 20 years ago. I've done it elsewhere. I've been licensed in several other states, and Youngstown just kind of pulled on my heartstrings, and along with my wife, who grew up here too. So we ended up moving back about a decade ago now, and I've been a licensed real estate agent here off and on for 18 years. And like you said, I currently work for a lender, which is kind of rare for a real estate agent. I help them as a liaison between the real estate industry and our mortgage company.
Okay. So definitely, like I said, you wear a lot of hats.
That's
a lot of
correct.
different hats.
Yeah.
So it was the pull of just being back in your hometown that made you come back to Youngstown?
The people here more than anything. It definitely wasn't the weather.
Yeah.
It's a great place to raise a family. And it also happens to be one of the cheapest places in America to live. And there's goods and bads that come with that. And real estate is definitely one of those things.
How many investment deals have you done over the last few years?
Personally, probably a few dozen. Over the course of my career, I've represented. I lost count a long time ago. It's in the hundreds. If I had to guess, it's probably closer to 500 than it is 1,000, but somewhere in there. In terms of representing investors of all sorts, I've done the smallest purchase price that I've done, if I remember correctly, was two single-family homes located on one city lot, so like a 50 by 100 foot deep lot on the north side of Youngstown for $3,000 total. And my biggest deal was somewhere around $44 or $45 million, and everything in between.
Was that in Youngstown too?
That was not. There are very few properties worth that much here in the area. That one happened to be located in Miami, Florida.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Reason I ask is I just want to give a little background, because one of the things that I do and that I've done over the past few years is doing investment properties myself, and so I always like to try and connect with someone, just shared experiences when it comes to doing real estate and seeing what kinds of, because I'm actually getting into the market as well in Youngstown, learning a little bit more. I've just bought a property this year that we're working on getting turned around and flipped, and looking at a couple of more. So people who are interested in doing real estate down here, they're gonna want to know what the market looks like from someone who's been in it. So that's the reason I ask. Mm-hmm. What's your typical investment strategy? Like, how do you approach a real estate purchase?
Well, it depends on such a variety of factors. That's a great question, but it's one where I don't want to give you a loaded answer. When it comes to me personally, I have my own personal taste. Some of those tastes have to do with just my experiences, good and bad, with investing here in the area, and some of it has to do with more personal and social reasons where, I may see a good deal that's 45 minutes to an hour away. It doesn't necessarily mean I want to buy it if I'm going to flip it, because it makes it hard for me to get to and still be able to to be a part of my family's life at home. So when I work with an investor who's looking to buy, we go over those type of issues too. And if it's purely from a money standpoint, a number standpoint, then it becomes, okay, well, how much money do you have to invest? How diversified do you want to be? Do you want to put all your eggs in one basket for a flip? If you only have X amount, or are you buying it to hold long term for that type of return? Because those are two completely different acquisitions. A house that would make an excellent flip isn't necessarily a good rental, and a great rental more times than not would not make a good flip. So it depends on what your end game is, what your strategy is, and why you want to get into that investment. And then based on those answers, which can be, run the gamut, I try to provide people with the best feedback as possible. One of the great things about Youngstown is that for the 18 years I've been in real estate, I've tracked reporting that the National Association of Realtors does every quarter and every year. They track, it depends on the year, somewhere between 260 and 270 metropolitan areas throughout the entire country. And they look at what median value is in all of those areas, sales volume, the numbers of sales, all that. So the number I like is median value. So what's the average value for that region? So in this area, they track Youngstown, Warren, and Boardman, and then all of the suburbs that surround those three communities, and they count that as one metropolitan area. So for the 18 years that I've been paying attention, and I've never looked to see how far back this goes, but for the 18 years that I've been paying attention, every single quarter of every single year, including 2018, this area is ranked dead last in the country for median home value. That's a good and a bad thing. So last year in 2018, if my memory serves, $84,000 and change was what the median value here was. We happen to be the only community in America now that's under $100,000. The national average is, I believe, around 262 or 265,000. Okay. Another way of saying that is the national average, meaning that 50% of the country is above that, right? The average is more than 300% greater than what we are. That's a huge, huge difference.
That's true.
So having lived elsewhere in the country and having family members that live elsewhere in the country now, but we all grew up here, it's interesting to have some of those conversations. So for me, I for 10 years was a full-time real estate investor until I started working for AmeriFirst 7 months ago. That's all I did. That was, if somebody asked me what I did, I was full-time real estate investor. I own my own construction company. We worked on solely just my properties. Most of those were flips. I could do a flip anywhere from $20,000 to, $1 million in this area. You can't say that for a lot of other areas. A 2,000 square foot home here may run me $84,000. In Dade County, Miami, it may run me anywhere from $500,000 to over $1 million. So not everybody can get into that game. It's hard to get into the game flipping in other parts of the country. It's hard to get into the game for renting in other parts of the country. My brother pays $3,000 a month for a 600 square foot, 1-bedroom apartment. He lives in Santa Monica. That would buy you a palace here in the best suburb you could find. So the good part is you don't need $1 million to start here, and it's a great place to start your nest egg and start growing. Because property values are so depressed here in certain areas, you get on average a much greater return if you're buying a rental than you would elsewhere. Investors who I've represented in the past would be very happy with a modest 4 to 6%, maybe 8% return annually on a rental home. In fact, many of them pre-tax are essentially breaking even. They're covering the mortgage, the taxes, and the insurance with the rent, and are happy to do so, but really don't walk away with much profit on an annual basis. Those plays, though, are because those owners are anticipating that the home value is going to go up to a nice degree. So if I make $1,000 in net proceeds from an entire year's worth of renting, but I have a $300,000 investment and it just went up in 2% in value, well, there's another $6,000 that I gained. It's just I'm not cashing that out right away. Plus the equity that you're paying down. Yeah. So it like here, you're not playing that long game because it would be silly to do so. We have historically anywhere from 2.5. Right now it's the hottest that I've seen it in 20 years, and we're getting about a 5% annual growth for 2018, and that's projected for this year. So 5% is like below average nationwide. I was in Sarasota County in 2006. They had 44% growth in 12 months, meaning if I bought a $100,000 condo and didn't do anything to it, just locked the doors and walked away for 12 months, it was worth $44,000 more when I came back to it. Yeah. So here we generally plot along with the rate of inflation. Okay, so inflation is right around 3% a year, give or take a few tenths of a point. And that's where we are here in Youngstown historically. So you're not playing that long game. What you're playing is the actual cash return annually based on your rent. And I see rents that are routinely 15, 20, 25% or greater if you get in and you buy right. I have some rentals myself where I make like a 40% annual return on it. The home pays for itself in 2 to 3 years. You can't do that.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic deal. The problem is that those homes are maybe $11,000 to $15,000, $20,000 investments, right? So I make 40% return, and all of a sudden in 1 year I'll make zero because you're plodding along and I'm making $5,000 or $6,000 in profit in a year. Well, what happens when I need to replace a roof? That cost me $5,000 or $6,000. So now I have an entire year where I've had to go through the headache of having tenants, and you make nil for that year. So you take the good with the bad. That's what I'm getting at with the prices here. That they allow you for some really above average returns if you know what you're doing, but then the bad does come along with it eventually if you're in it long enough. Flipping's the same thing. So flipping, I can get in cheap, right? I can buy something cheap. I'll give you an example of, let's say I buy something. I generally spend at least $75,000 to $175,000 on an acquisition. I like homes that are going to sell after they're fixed between $125,000 and $250,000. For me, that's my sweet spot. It's not for everybody. I've done the ones that are $20,000 buys, and then you turn around, you put $5,000 into them and you sell them for $30,000. You make a quick $5,000. That's great for the right people, for guys that have the time to get in there and do the work, or have a crew that can get in and out fast. That's great. The problem that I always have is if I'm looking at it only making a $5,000 profit and something goes wrong, I lose money. I don't just kill my profit. I lose money.
Right.
So that's one of the downfalls here, where if I'm in California and it may take me $400,000 to get into a home to buy it and another $100,000 to fix it, but if my profit margin is $100,000, if I have a $20,000, so if I have a $20,000 unintended fix that has to happen, hey, there's a septic system that fails, you totally didn't know about it, or I have a heating system and a roof that need to be replaced. And for some reason I didn't anticipate that. So now you can take $20,000 out of a potential $100,000 profit. You're not losing your shirt. It's not changing your life. If I have a total $100,000 project, so maybe I buy it for $75,000 and put $25,000 into it, and then I get hit with a $20,000 expense, I probably ate into all of my profit here. Because there are very few deals where you're going to make above 20 or 25 grand on a deal. They're out there, but there's so many investors that are in the market right now, and the market's hot enough with owner occupants that are looking to buy. Those are few and far between. It isn't like it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Let me ask you this. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Based on your experience, what do you see as a big mistake or the biggest mistake that many investors are making in the Youngstown marketplace?
They make a lot.
Well, just the biggest.
Buying something sight unseen, I see a lot of that, and to me it blows my mind. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's a good deal. In fact, the fact that it's cheap, it should be telling you something. If a property is dirt cheap, the property itself, the physical condition of the property, either has something majorly wrong with it, or it's in an area where others aren't going to pay more than that. The market kind of sets those prices unless there's some extenuating circumstance. So if it's on the open market and everybody's had a crack at it, it's not the first day it's listed, and the market hasn't spoken already, there's a reason. And a lot of guys that I've represented over the years buy sight unseen without even knowing anything about Youngstown or even being here. They've never been here. Here's an example. Two guys from Southern California who weren't real estate investors bought like 6 or 7 homes as a portfolio buy off of eBay. Then they called me. They had never been to Ohio, let alone Youngstown. So they flew out here, and I took them around to those homes in 1 day span, and I showed them what they bought, and they were pleased as punch that they were paying maybe $7,000 or $8,000 a piece for these things. There's a reason why they were $7,000 to $8,000. I can't remember how many, but the great majority of them, maybe 5 or 6, were uninhabitable. Like the best thing you could do to them was to take a bulldozer to the entire house and then sell the lot for $1,000. They never came back. The plans before they came was to have me help them hire a crew and fix them up and rent them out or sell them and all that. And after 1 day, they were shell shocked. You'd be amazed how many people do that. That's just silly.
Actually,
yeah,
I would say this. I'll put a qualifier to that because I've bought property sight unseen, but only in areas that I have a crew on the ground. Like you met Matthew, my partner.
Yeah.
He's the person on the ground when we were doing deals in Michigan. I was in Virginia and buying properties in Michigan, mainly because I had someone there that, we had built a network of folks that we could count on and look at and check out properties. So I would say that would be the qualifier for me is to just have some.
That's not necessarily sight unseen, though. Somebody's walking into that house before you're making an offer, I hope.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm talking about
so
sight unseen. I mean, they didn't realize that there was 6 feet of water in the basement of 4 of those.
Oh yeah, that's
okay.
I wouldn't do that. Yeah,
and that water had been there for 5 years or longer. It destroyed the homes. So those homes hadn't even been lived in for over a decade or more. Yeah, and I see that. I represented a hedge fund out of Wall Street once, and they bought 55 properties. Theirs wasn't sight unseen, but they didn't do their due diligence. They came here and I showed them, I don't know, about half of them, most of which I had to break into, because they were boarded up and had been for years and years and years, and most of them were on the city's demolition list because they were eyesores and hadn't been lived in for a decade or more. And they just thought, well, these prices are too good to be true. Very rarely is that the case. So that's a big mistake that I see. Another mistake that I see is you don't realize, a lot of investors don't realize how financing works. And because of that, they're hamstrung when it comes to, if they're flipping, when they come to get rid of it, when they're trying to liquidate. So back when we had the Great Recession, the government passed the Frank-Dodd Act, and what that act did is it put some handcuffs on the lending industry. One thing that it did is, in layman's terms, it essentially said, hey, it's unfair for a lender to charge a ridiculous percentage on their closing cost on a loan. So, like, I can't charge you, 15%. I'm not talking interest rate. I'm talking I'm going to make, I want 15% of the total amount of the loan to to be as a closing cost because I want to make money on the loan up front. And a lot of banks do that. A lot of banks aren't in the loan to make money on the loan over the life of the loan. They want to get paid a few $1,000 up front for their trouble, and then they sell that loan off on the secondary market and have nothing to do with it from that point forward. They're not holding any of the risk anymore because they're not holding the mortgage.
Right.
So the Frank-Dodd Act said you can't. They made the rule based on a percentage, not a dollar amount. Okay, so what happened was that's fine for 99.9% of the country, because if the national average value of a home is $264,000, and you say, hey, look, you can't charge more than 3% on that amount, well, great. There's, $7,500 to $8,500 in real money that we can get. That's a lot. We don't even need to charge that much. Okay, we'll charge $1,000 or $2,000. Fine. Now take 2 or 3% of $25,000. Now you're talking about a couple $100, not a couple thousand. And banks, when they're doing a loan, are looking at everything they do is in terms of underwriting is they're just measuring a risk. How risky is this borrower, and how risky is the home based on its condition in the area, and how likely are we to get paid back, and if we have to foreclose, how easy is it going to be for us to sell this house? That's all they look at. So if I'm in an area where the average price of the homes are selling for $25,000, like in the city limits of Youngstown, or less, how easy do you think for a lender is it going to be to get that person qualified for a traditional loan? They're probably not going to have great credit. They're probably not going to have a well-paying job with a long job history. Even if they did, they're buying a house that's in an area that has repressed values, so that's risky even in itself. You could be a multimillionaire, but if you're applying for a loan there, and the bank said, well, even if you made it a little bit easier, but usually it's a harder loan in terms of the man hours that have to go into doing it.
Right.
And even if you're a millionaire and it becomes a little bit easier of a loan, we're only going to make $200, $400, $600. Why do we want to do that? It's a waste of our time. I'd rather take our time and do a $200,000 loan because that's an easier loan to do, and we're going to make 20 times the amount. So
it's an easier deal to do too.
Yeah, exactly.
I noticed that as well. When it comes to those smaller deals seems like you have to work 10 times as hard to make a little bit less money. But
you're right.
But in the grand scheme of things, if you're starting out, you can learn a lot of different things, a lot of good lessons doing those smaller deals. You absolutely
can, and you're not going to ruin your life. If you lose $20,000, it sucks, and it definitely can affect somebody. But it's a lot different than losing $200,000. For many people, if you lost $200,000, you'd be in debt to some people for quite a long time, or it'd force you to declare bankruptcy. So what the banks have done essentially, and each bank is different, but for the most part, right around $50,000 is as low anyone will go on a purchase loan. Now the Frank-Dodd rules don't apply when you're refinancing, but for purchase loans, some banks only will go to $75,000, some will go to $60,000, some will go to $50,000, some will even get into the $40,000s, but they're fewer and far between those the further south in terms of price you go. So a lot of guys that want to flip in the $15,000 or $20,000 acquisition range don't realize all the things that go into selling that. It's great. Like you could have 6 people that want to buy the house, but if they don't have a way to pay for it, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a reason why I don't flip below that price level, because I'm thinking here are the 2 ways you buy a house under $50,000 or significantly under $50,000. You either pay cash or you do some type of seller financing, which means I'm not getting all of my money back if I'm the seller immediately, which affects my rate of return. Because if I make 10% on $25,000 and you pay me that 10% return today, that gives me future opportunity to go out and make 10% again. So if I do that 3 times in a year, I didn't make 10% on my $25,000. I've made 30% return. Where if I have to wait 12 months to get all my money back, I've only made 10% return. That's called opportunity cost. So because of that, you have to realize what kind of the end. It doesn't matter if you have a buyer or not if they can't pay for it. So if you're buying the flips under $50,000 in the Youngstown area, anywhere in America, you have to realize, okay, more than likely I'm going to have to hold this thing for a 2 or 3 year period. And if I'm holding it that long, doing something like a land contract, where hopefully the goal is to have that person refinance at some point to pay you off, they're still going to have to qualify for a traditional loan. Depending on how you structure that land contract, the underwriters may not treat it as a true land contract. They may just say, well, it's still a new purchase agreement, and it's under 50, so we're not going to do it regardless. So you have to understand all of those things. So before somebody goes and makes an offer, they got to know what it's going to be worth, number one, after they fix it up. Because if you don't, you shouldn't be making that offer. So you got to know what the value of that property is going to be worth after you're done with the repairs. You have to have a reasonable expectation of what those repairs are going to cost. Your offer should reflect what you think you need to pay for the property in order to make whatever profit margin you're looking for. But you also should be talking with somebody like a lender saying, hey, look, if I have a buyer who comes my way, are they even able to perform on a purchase agreement? Because if they're not, and you're looking to flip, what I see happen a lot is flips. People that are looking to flip all of a sudden turn into long-term rentals. And what I said at the beginning of this was a good rental doesn't necessarily make a good flip, and a good flip doesn't necessarily make a good rental. You should know what you're doing before you buy the property. It should be one or the other, not both.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Very good advice. Now, I know you have another appointment coming up, but I have one last question. I do a little bit of a random question for my final question. And then hopefully next time we can talk a little bit more about the land contracts and stuff like that. I'm curious to get your take on it. What was the last book you read, and one positive takeaway that you learned from reading it?
The last book that I read, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, is the last nonfiction that I finished, which is a book that anybody in any business, especially sales, should read. It's probably an 80 or 90-year-old book. And almost every Fortune 500 company that I know of, if you're in management or in sales, it's almost required reading. It's about how to treat others, how you would want to be treated, and how to communicate with people on a personal level. And if you can do that and put yourself in their shoes, and by that I mean like look through their eyes of what brings them value, then they truly will appreciate you either as a friend or as a business associate or as an advisor in any role. But it will come from the heart, and it will be genuine. It's a great read. It's one that if you haven't read it, or if any of your listeners haven't read it yet, it's not one that schools really talk about until you get to college.
True.
Really, if you're getting into real estate investing, the book that I would recommend is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert
Kiyosaki. I was a disciple of Mr. Kiyosaki for many years. I read all of those books.
The theme of that one is essentially, if you're in real estate, if you can identify what the highest and best value of a property is, if that highest and best value is something that is different from what the current use of the property is, then there is an advantage to be taken. So here's a real life story that goes right along with that. And the thing I like about his first book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is he gives a lot of real life examples that he actually did. But here's one that's from me that was told to me first person by the person who benefited from this. So when I lived in Florida, I did commercial real estate, and we had to take certain classes that are kind of like the equivalent of getting a master's degree in commercial real estate. So one of these classes was taught by a guy who was based out of Orlando, Florida, who was the head of all commercial real estate for Coldwell Banker in Florida. So very interesting man, very successful. So he told this story. I-4 is a major highway that runs in between Tampa and Orlando. Disney World is located on I-4. And it's become a major corridor in the last 10 or 15 years. And he used to drive to work using I-4, and he would go by this exit every day, and he'd see this big sign, like billboard, of a old motel that was probably built like in the 50s or 60s. You know those motels where you walk up the stairs on the outside of the building, and it's like a big walkway that's on the outside, and then each room you kind of access from the outside. So picture one of those. So he sees this thing's for sale for like a year, and nothing's happening with it. So what he does is he has a secretary figure out who the owner is, how to get a hold of him, calls the owner and says, hey, look, here's who I am. You don't know me from Sunday. You know, is your listing up with that hotel, because I think I can help you sell it? And the guy goes, yeah, it expired, you know, a month or two ago, and you know, I'm kind of disappointed. He goes, well, how much were you asking for it? $8 million. Huh. Okay. If I could sell that property today, would you sign a 24-hour listing agreement? Meaning, the guy is legally allowed to list a property, but only for a day. And the seller is kind of like, you're kind of crazy, but yeah, sure. How low will you go? Well, I really want to get $8 million for it. Well, okay, let me try. I'll give you a call back. Within the course of 60 minutes, he verbally had that property sold. Here's what he did. When he drove by every day, over time, he just let it kind of sit there and percolate in the back of his head while he's driving. And eventually one day he realized, hey, you know what? That's probably 5 or 6 acres, and the hotel or the motel isn't really worth much because it needs millions of dollars put into a retrofit if you wanted to keep it that. But there's a giant mall that's right across the street from it. It's located right at an on and off ramp to one of the busiest highways in Florida. It's the only thing that mall doesn't own real estate wise between the interstate and the mall. So all he did was he called up Simon Investment Properties, who owned the mall, and explained who he was, got to a decision maker, and he sold it like this. He said, look, I've got a piece of property that's 6 acres. It's the only thing you don't own between the interstate and this mall. It gets 150,000 cars that buzz by it every day. Do you want it? He didn't even mention the fact that there was a building there. The guy says, yeah, we'd be interested. $8 million will get it done. I need an answer by today. 20 minutes later, he got a phone call back. So the guy made probably 5 or 6% on $8 million. So let's say it's 5%. That's $50,000 for every million. Times that by 8. He made $400,000 by lunch. Not a bad day at work, right?
Not a bad day at all.
True story, too. So the point of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, one of the points that book makes is if you can identify what the highest and best is for a real estate, it's not a single-family home isn't always a single-family home. It may be a better use for something else, just like that motel. If you can do that, you're seeing something creatively that the rest of us may not be. Don't get blinded by stuff. Be creative. And if you can do that, you can make money. And you don't even need money to make money that way. If you're somebody who can find that deal, you can always sell that concept to the guy who has money. And now you just split those profits. But if I make $10,000 out of thin air without investing any of my money, I've made an infinitesimal return on my investment because my investment was zero other than my time.
Wow. That is a good story. I think that's a good place to put a button on this podcast. Let that resonate. Well, I appreciate your time today. Yeah, well, yeah, same here. I appreciate your time today. We went a little longer than I thought, but I think there's some great information that you gave out. And I'll definitely put your information as far as to contact you if someone's interested in reaching out for a mortgage or doing a deal with you with Century 21 Lakeside. So